Welcome to James Joyce's divine and delirious comedy Finnegans Wake. This episode, number 24, is a special one because joining us from Berkeley, California will be scholar Nina Beguš, who is using Finnegans Wake to shape an unusual AI named FinneGAN. Hi, I'm Adam Seelig, and I'm the director of the Finnegans Wake film series produced by One Little Goat Theatre Company. Thank you to those of you who joined us in Hudson, New York recently on June 11th at Time and Space Limited for Joyce Cage, an evening featuring excerpts from One Little Goat's Finnegans Wake film series paired with Wake-inspired songs by John Cage. And thank you to those of you in Dublin who attended our all-day screening of Finnegans Wake Chapter 4 at the James Joyce Center for the Bloomsday Film Festival on Bloomsday, June 16th. Finnegans Wake is a production of One Little Goat Theatre Company. One Little Goat is filming and recording all 17 chapters, roughly 30 hours, of Joyce's Finnegans Wake before live audiences in various locations, screening and releasing them along the way with the aim of completing the entire book for its 90th birthday, May 4th, 2029. One Little Goat Theatre Company is an official charity in Canada and the United States. To help us produce this first-of-its-kind filmed reading series, of which we've filmed 8 chapters so far with 9 more to go, please visit onelittlegoat.org to make a charitable donation. Your donation enables us to bring this production to audiences and helps support the outstanding artists who make it possible. To be the first to hear about our live tapings, events, and screenings, please join our mailing list, also at onelittlegoat.org. Earlier this year, several people sent me an online article published by Harvard's Graduate School of Arts and Sciences titled, What Finnegans Wake Teaches Us About AI. This was my introduction to the fascinating work of scholar Nina Beguš and the special AI she helped train named FinneGAN. Nina's research focuses on the oft-overlooked inner workings of artificial intelligence known as latent spaces, which she compares to the unusual dream language of Joyce's last novel. In the process, she's also coined a term that combines imagination with imitation through a creative process she calls imagitation. Brilliant. Nina is the author most recently of Artificial Humanities, a fictional perspective on language and AI, published by University of Michigan Press, and she joins me right now from her office at the University of California, Berkeley. And allow me to just add 2 quick comments here. Number one is that as a Stanford University alumnus and therefore automatically a Berkeley rival, I have set aside my anti-Cal prejudices to conduct this interview with you today, Nina. It took a lot of work for me to do that. And number 2 is, more seriously, I'm taking a moment to note the recent death of Frederick Wiseman, whose cinematic style is a model and inspiration for the Finnegans Wake film series I'm now directing with One Little Goat Theatre Company. All of Wiseman's movies are amazing, but if I had to choose a favorite, it would be At Berkeley, his 4-hour film of the illustrious university where we now find Nina. Nina Beguš, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Adam and everyone. I'm so glad to be here.
Wow, there is so much for us to discuss. Let's get into it. In your AI research, I'm seeing a thorough understanding of and appreciation for the arts, and you're a clear champion for the humanities. To quote you back to yourself, humanities are co-cartographers of AI's interior, bringing literary, philosophical, and architectural tools into spaces that engineering alone cannot fully describe or design.
Yes.
In the Harvard article, you mentioned wanting to bring your work in artificial intelligence and digital humanities to a wider audience, including artistic communities. So this might be a case of careful what you wish for, because as part of an artistic community myself, I'm eager to know more about your work, particularly your work with James Joyce's last novel and in AI. And this work focuses on latent space. Can you tell us what is latent space?
Yes, latent spaces the term is more popular with humanists, I must say, than with technologists, first of all. But we call latent spaces these hidden layers that are doing all the work behind what any AI model that we have today is doing. So basically, they are these black boxes that we have a really hard time interpreting, because the latent spaces are basically mathematical categories. They have they are the structures of vectors with hundreds or thousands of dimensions. And in that way, they are invisible to us humans and unimaginable to us humans. But we have techniques that can help us try to visualize them and understand them, although they are radically invisible and inaccessible. And some of these techniques we're using in this very technical field of interpretability, trying to see what the models are doing inside. And then in this paper that you mentioned, Latent Spacecraft, and in our work that we exhibited in the art world, we've shown that you could also use humanistic interpretability. You can use humanistic techniques, methods such as comparison, interpretation, reading, metaphorical, spatial thinking, to navigate these interiors of machine learning models.
There were two terms that I didn't know until I encountered your work. One was this latent space, which you've described wonderfully, and maybe I could echo it back to you as a kind of interior of every AI model that we've been working. Is that fair to say that it's kind of one layer back from the surface?
Yes. Yeah. The latency is crucial.
And there's this other term, GAN. Could you tell us what that is, please?
So we call them GANs. This is just it's abbreviation for Generative Adversarial Networks. It's an architecture of an AI model. It's very different from what people usually know, which is large language models that are built on transformer architecture. This architecture, it's called generative because these networks are very productive. You give them just a little bit of data and they figure it out on their own. We gave them just 8 words of English and they figured out the whole phonology of the English language, for example. So here's the first difference with large language models. They need a lot, humongous amounts of data. GANs need very little to be able to produce something. Adversarial in their name is really about having 2 neural networks within this architecture. There are 2 networks that train each other. One is, I often describe them as Dr. Higgins and Eliza from Shaw's Pygmalion, because one network sees the data, knows what the data is, and the other one doesn't. So the one, and I think GANs are actually the only architecture that never sees the data, this generator that needs to produce it, that needs to produce fake data. This generator basically starts from scratch, starts with complete noise. It doesn't know what the other network is going to offer as data. So it only learns from its feedback, right? It could be pixels, it could be text, it could be sound, it could be anything. And so it starts with complete noise. And then slowly, through feedback and through trying out different options, it gets to more and more structure and eventually to a word in our case, because we gave them words as input data. And this all happens without human intervention.
Incredible. So the only part that you have contributed is the vocabulary. And in your case, your vocabulary that you're describing was under 8 words. Now, I believe that your GAN learned to say start or something that was somewhat comprehensible or almost comprehensible to us. What was that experiment?
So those are the basic GANs, right? The ones where we just teach them how English language looks like. So we gave them 8 words, such as greasy, very just suit, very, very basic random words. And they would start producing new words. One of the first words, if not the first word, was actually start. And it was a combination of the words that they were fed to, but it wasn't in the training data. So this is what we call imagitation, because they don't just imitate. They don't produce just greasy because they've seen greasy, but from those little few words, they're able to come up with new words of English or possible words of English.
So I have the list of words here from that experiment. The words were ask, carry, dark, greasy, like, suit, water, and year. And you say here that from that, the model could produce start or sart, a plausible word that follows English phonology, but isn't in our vocabulary. So and I'm quoting you here, they don't produce non-plausible words. They figure out the rules quickly. One of the many things that is fascinating about the work that you're doing is that your GANs are behaving like children who are acquiring language. Yes?
Yes, they are much closer to how us humans acquire language than, for example, large language models, which obviously learn on text, which is not how any human learns how to speak, and also need an immense amount of data. So the way it works with GANs is they learn from their environment. This is how our children learn too, right? They have, basic imitation, a child learning from parents, just working with the principles that they are introduced to in their environment. And then they are able to push further into novel combinations, right? Sometimes kids would come up with a new word that doesn't really exist, right? And there's this aspect of playfulness in this.
I love that. The playfulness is so key. As a parent myself, when my kids were much younger, this is now years ago, my eldest at one point drew a picture of a bunny rabbit in a window, and then he described what was going on. He said, "This bunny is eyesing on the window." So there's no such thing as eyesing, as we all know, and maybe it was looking through or looking at or what have you, but he invented. The younger one at one point came up with one that we still use to this day, which is he invented carrot on the cob. So kids are just amazing with figuring it out, playing with it, making themselves known, and sometimes maybe just in invention. And that's what I love about this this term that you've coined: imitation plus imagination equals imagitation. And let's get to Joyce now, because you are claiming that Joyce, let me paraphrase, and you can tell me if I'm out of line here, was a pioneer in exploring this latent space or this childlike playfulness that bent the rules of conventional syntax.
Yes. I mean, as with many things with Joyce, he kind of anticipates what happens in computing decades before that's even, anything like that is a possibility. So in the history of computing and Joyce and this conversation that's been happening, a lot of computing returns to Joyce. So it's not a coincidence that we did too, because it's just so interesting how he manages to chart this latency of language. What he was trying to do, he said, he called it the writing of the night. He said there are other registers of language. Language is sometimes given in a state which doesn't really work during the day. It's not orderly. He called it wide awake language. He said, this is not what I'm going after, not go ahead plot and cut a dry grammar. He said, I want to try to see how the writing of the night looks like. So basically going into this latency of language where what's happening with language when it's a little bit like not completely external, not completely externalized, because he really tried to express how things are in the night in different stages, the conscious, unconscious, semi-conscious. He's talking about that to his editor in his letters when he's writing Finnegans Wake. That was his pursuit to sort of, I think the easiest way to imagine this is for me to ask you, try to imagine a red apple. And as I ask you this, do you see it in your brain? Can you imagine it?
I do. It's also a dangerous question to ask of someone named Adam, but go on.
Yes. So most people will be able to imagine this, visualize the red apple in a sort of low definition, right? It's not completely clear the way your vision can render it if you don't try, right?
Yeah.
And this is how language is like as well. You can hear me speak now in clear sentences, but the way language works in my internal layers, in my biological neural networks in my brain, is more compressed, has this low definition to it. Mm-hmm. And this is why Joyce is so informative of what we found in our AI models in GANs, because when you listen to GANs, you will also hear they have this kind of old school gritty sound. They are not this. I mean, it was very important for us to be able to publish these models, to be able for people to just access them and play with them and hear them and see how they work.
How is it that the GAN has that kind of voice? What determined the voice of your GAN? In Finnegans Wake, the voice of the narrative often adheres, however lightly, to whoever might be in the scene. If it's Anna Olivia Pluribel, then that voice might be more flowing and river-like because she is a river. And if it's Earwicker, then it might take on some of his pub-keeping kinds of sounds and consciousness. And this narrative kind of floats throughout Finnegans Wake from one point, and so takes on these different, literally hundreds of different voices, languages, and so on, depending on what's happening in that zone. How did you and your GAN get there? How did your GAN get its voice? And I should also really highlight the name of your GAN, which is FinneGAN.
Yeah, that's a different GAN. So we created one that's just words of English. And then we trained another one from scratch simply on Finnegans Wake. So this other model, FinneGAN, as we call him, we never really saw actual English words, does not know how our English looks like, only knows the world of Finnegans Wake. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about this voice or sound is because so the engineering part, Gašper Beguš, who made these models in his lab here at Berkeley, the engineering part is not very involved. You don't really know what will come out of it. Gašper also trained these models on whale clicks because he's studying whale communication. And you can pretty much train them on anything. I mean, GANs were initially, about 10 years ago, famous for the deep fakes of cats, right? This is how it all started.
Okay.
Now, do they have a distinct voice? They have this imitative power, of course, but we really wanted to publish them because in general, in mainstream AI, people only interact with large language models that are very polished. They have these glib exteriors, right? Language is very smooth. It's this world of perfect Newtonian physics where the apple falls beautifully down from the tree.
There's that apple again. Yes.
There's the apple. But with GANs, it's not. It's like listening to the radio that, it doesn't have quite the clean frequency yet.
Very nice. And that's where FinneGAN, or at least Finnegans Wake, I should say, and you can speak more to FinneGAN, but Finnegans Wake plays in so nicely into what you're doing as a kind of literary model even for that in-between night languagey, children's language, pre-verbal, post-verbal, can't quite put your finger on it kind of quality, the dreamlike quality. That was one thing I wanted to ask you about too, is that there's a lot of focus on children acquisition or child acquisition of language and of the childlike play in GANs. And one of the things I wanted to mention in that regard is dreams. I feel like through the dream language of Finnegans Wake, there's a collapse of the conscious and rational and a kind of unconscious return to that pre-conscious or young, playful kind of zone of speech. And so maybe when we sleep at night, we are going back to a childlike place.
I love this comparison. Yes. When we started working on this project, so this was with Gašper Beguš, who built the models, and then with MetaHaven, this wonderful artistic collective that helped us think through this and visualize the models together with Ricardo Petrini. When we started talking about it, we said, isn't it funny how all these terms, subconscious, deep learning, embedding, they suggest that all cognitive structures have this depth. And it seems like there's this spatial metaphor about how we think of latency and making the invisible spaces visible, which is really what we're trying to do here. And this is why we called it latent spacecraft, because latent spacecraft is really about navigating. It's a craft of approaching spaces that are not navigable in a way. And our choice was to navigate them through language, because we know a lot about human language. Linguists have studied it for a long time, cognitive scientists, right?
Yes.
We know a lot about literature. So this was our way in. It was through language acquisition and through literary experiments, such as Finnegans Wake. And I love the dream comparison, because dreams make sense, right, when you're in them, even though rationally they might not. But there's this world that is being held together, and it's not in high definition again. It's about this noisiness that GANs also produced when they try to get to a structure. So when they go from noise to a signal, from noise to a word, they produce a structure that's clearer and clearer. And this is also how we presented the model. You look at the model and it goes from noise and then into upper and upper and upper layer, and you can see the structure coming together. And at the end, you sort of hear a sentence that you kind of think you know what it might mean, but it's not completely externalized language yet. It's like peeking into this dreamlike world where structures are formed in this cloud-like formations, in this soft, condensed formations.
I want to point our listeners to, in the transcript of this episode that we're doing right now, they're going to find a link to this FinneGAN that you have online. I think there are two GANs there. One is FinneGAN and the other one combines words.
Yes.
But people who are listening who don't have patience to go online and find that can just Google latent spacecraft, and it's brains, GANs, Finnegans. Latent spacecraft, brains, GANs, Finnegans. And I'm on that site right now and looking at this. And as promised, we're coming back to this. I want to understand what's going on here. I'm seeing, for those of you who are as old as I, a kind of foggy TV test pattern like image in black, mostly in black and white, and some interesting patterns that are unfolding. And so this almost Rorschach-like thing that I'm looking at that has a circle in the middle and then some clouds all around it, it's very evocative. What happens when I go there?
Well, basically, every time you open this website with the model produces a new sentence from scratch, a sentence that I have never heard or anybody else has never heard. It's unique every single time because the model's actually working and producing it for you.
Incredible. Do you think that we could, when we're done with our interview today, do you think that I could borrow some or have some audio of what that sounds like, and we can maybe put some of that into this episode so people can hear a couple of sentences?
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
I think, yeah, you might have to explain that they don't necessarily will understand what it is saying. Sometimes the words are close to intelligible, and we put a transcriptor that's trying to make sense of what's been said, but sometimes it's not very accurate.
So those who are reading Finnegans Wake well know that we're spending a lot of time with the equivalent of your transcriptor trying to figure out what's happening here in this latent space of a novel that James Joyce has created. And maybe what we'll do is I'm going to share a little bit of Joyce's background in, let's say, experimenting or exploring children and their approach to sound, speech, experience, and how important that was to his work, especially in Finnegans Wake. And then maybe you could provide a sentence or two you've heard or that have surprised you from your FinneGAN. Would that be an okay approach right now?
Oh, absolutely. I can already do it right now. In the article itself, we put a sentence.
Yes.
We inhabit a locked hole, but can we use it?
Right. We inhabit a locked hole, but can we use it? I'm recording this after the interview and want to thank Nina for providing me with her original audio recordings of FinneGAN to share with you all. Here's how that phrase sounded when FinneGAN's voice, so to speak, spoke these words in the first place. And let me just add, and perhaps this is my Finnegans Wake brain accustomed to cyclical themes of falling and rising in the novel, but where Nina's lab transcription has, quote, right, we inhabit a locked hole, close quote, I swear I can hear her FinneGAN saying, rise, we inhabit a locked hole. Okay, here's the recording.
Rise, we inhabit a locked hole, but can we use it?
That was one of the sentences. I love that one.
Yeah. So even in the locked hole sentence, you can hear that the model actually says holy. It doesn't say whole. But the transcriptor is modern. So it will put some things in there that have not existed in Joyce's time. It doesn't have a sense of history.
So maybe we could, maybe we can let our listeners hear a couple of those, and I'll find a way to get that audio, and you yourselves can hear a couple of those sentences. And indeed, following the interview, Nina generously sent me some more of FinneGAN's eccentric phrases, beginning with the second one mentioned in her article, Latent Spacecraft, Brains, GANs, FinneGANs, which her lab, using whisper speech recognition software, transcribed as, quote, power of Motsunoshi Station, let us wait ate. Here's how FinneGAN said it originally.
Have
there been any other sentences that have stood out for you? I'll let you think about that while I share some sentences from Joyce, or even just quickly, a quick kind of background on children in literature and how really they were ignored for so long. In my mind, at least in English literature, it's William Wordsworth who really champions children's experience. And he even in the prelude talked about the poetic spirit, and he claims that everyone is born with the poetic spirit. He calls it the first poetic spirit of our human life. And all are born with it, but only some remember it. Of course, those who remember it are, self-congratulatory as always, I imagine, the poets. And poets hold on to that. So we all have that. I'm thinking like, analogously, it seems like the large language models are the adults who have forgotten that poetic spirit, whereas your GAN is the child or that has maintained that poetic spirit.
I loved it. You say that because, when we were working with the transcriptor, we said, it's like the adult trying to make sense of what the kid is saying.
Terrific. Yes.
Yeah, and sometimes not recognizing. I mean, I had this experience myself. My oldest child is named Tomasz, and he could not pronounce his name when he was an infant. And so he would always say, mba, mba, mba. And we had no idea what that means until many months later.
Yes.
We deciphered it.
Yes. And he knew all along, and he was making himself known, and it was us who took a little more time to figure it out. But eventually, the penny will drop. In Joyce's work, he's already from Dubliners. A young protagonist says that, I'm quoting here, "Every night as I gazed up at the window, I said softly to myself the word paralysis. It had always sounded strangely in my ears, like the word gnomon in the Euclid and the word simony or simony, some people say, in the Catechism." Then we have Portrait. He goes on to the next, to the novel, which famously opens with a kind of children's story. Once upon a time, and a very good time it was, there was a moo cow coming down along the road. And this moo cow that was coming down along the road had been a nice little boy named Baby Tuku. I mean, this is really getting at these early sounds. In Ulysses, there's the chapter Oxen of the Sun, where Joyce is exploring the liminal, embryonic, unconscious speech. It opens with these words that I can barely even pronounce, much as your son was unable to pronounce his own name early on and finding some other form of speech. And so it's kind of early pregnancy of language is something he's exploring there. Yeah. And then I would say when we get to Finnegans Wake, perhaps the greatest influence on the entire novel, and people will argue otherwise for sure, might be Mother Goose. On page 1, we already have Humpty Dumpty, and this is from the first page of the opening page of Finnegans Wake. "The great fall of the off-wall entailed at such short notice the shoot of Finnegan, earth's solid man, that the Humpty Hill head of himself promptly sends an unquiring one well to the west in quest of his tumty-tum toes." So there we have Humpty Dumpty from the start. So we know we have someone who is taking the, let's call it unserious, I put in quotes, literature for children and songs and so on and games, and taking them very, very seriously and mining them and playing with them and stretching them. The first chapter of book 2, which is the chapter I'm rehearsing with Richard Hart now, is all children's games, children's dances, children's songs, children's rhymes. So the importance of childhood in this work and the playfulness that it brings is so essential. And so now I want to turn to you one more time and hear maybe some play from your FinneGAN, another sentence or two that it's kind of played with or invented.
Yeah, I mean, approaching this pre-verbal world, I think is the right identity to it. I'm trying to see what other sentences have I written down. Some were actually quite obscene. I'm looking at my folder right now to find them.
We want to hear the obscene ones. This is, of course, James Joyce's world that we're dealing with. So, after the interview, Nina successfully dug up the phrase she was thinking of, which her lab transcribed as, quote, "wanted him quite well for the Olympics, Kolopolichevsky rectum," close quote. Here's how FinneGAN's original utterance sounded.
"Wanted him quite well for the Olympics, Kolopolichevsky rectum."
And here's another FinneGAN expression transcribed as, quote, "This is a gag out of I'm a slaughtering to you with a sauce and a stubber ultra meat," close quote.
"This is a gag out of I'm a slaughtering to you with a sauce and a stubber ultra meat."
And here's one last phrase from FinneGAN, transcribed by Nina's lab via speech recognition software as, quote, "Boris's tower, this round moves completely into my Abu Dhabi city."
Boris tower, this round moves completely into my city.
You've provided some examples of the expression, and we talked about the voice, and this is maybe a little bit strange, but music and tone, is that something that is going to play into FinneGAN?
Well, we're continuing this project with a second iteration, because we started talking about this all also in relation to animals, because machines have acquired human language, but there were some animals that have learned the rudiments of it, like parrots, and they would do imagitation in some sort of way, where this Einstein parrot named Alex by Irene Pepperberg, he didn't know the word apple. We're back with apples, but he knew banana and cherry. So he called the apple binary. So
Incredible.
there was, and this is still so unexplored. And I mentioned already that Gašper works on deciphering whale communication. So we've been thinking about sound across humans and machines and also animals, just looking at this underlying principles of that maybe work across neural networks, both biological and artificial. But we've also been wondering, what's the original sound? What was the first sound on Earth? Have we always had sound or speech? And I think when you describe now Joyce playing and going back to these childlike operations, approaching the pre-linguistic, pre-verbal world, this is really hard to do for an artist. Even if you look at visual artists, for example, right, they become really good in realism and then they go into some other style. And sometimes, at the age of 3 and 4 and 5, our children create masterpieces. Like, I have a full house of just my kids' paintings because sometimes they are just so good that you actually have to frame them. And as an artist, you're kind of trying to go back to that unbounded exploration that you had as a child, that you could afford as a child, because you did not know the rules. You did not know limitations, right? This is how it is with language. You're just exploring it. We've all gone through these nursing rhymes and through these tales and stories, because this is how you learn how to reason and how to think. So yeah, going all the way back to this, I think it's more and more important because science has been completely separated from arts. But now, especially with AI, I think it's becoming more important to have them together. And that hasn't been always the case, that they've been separated, right? I just read Lamarck's biography, and back in the day, scientists would be inspired by a poem during their research process. So I think what we're really trying to push for here is to have this more interdisciplinary approach to exploring what we see as pure technicality, as this technology.
I have a question for you about the GANs. Now, you're working with, I imagine, several. Just for this purpose, let me narrow it down to 2. Let me narrow it down to FinneGAN, and the other one where you had 8 words and then it invented the word or imagitated the word SART or start, something that was close to something we recognize and isn't almost and even is intelligible to us. And I'm asking about the difference between the two, because the one where you fed in 8 words, well, that's not a lot. But the FinneGAN, did you feed the FinneGAN over 600 pages of text? Because that is obviously drastically more. And how did the limit of one influence that GAN versus the abundance of the other?
Yes, so there's much more data. They are both very small models, but there's much more data with the FinneGAN. And the way we did it is we used the audio for GANs, not text. So this is a novel that's meant to be read aloud. I mean, in the paper, I think we put a loud reading from Swenny's, where, an actual place in Ireland where people still gather to read Ulysses and other works because it's a reference in the novel. So this sound aspect of Joyce is primary, right? Especially with Finnegans Wake.
Absolutely. I concur 100% as someone who's involved with filming and recording Richard Hart and Pip Dwyer, reading all of this material. I couldn't agree more. Yes. Sorry, go on.
Yes. So the 2 models, the FinneGAN is because it is trained on like 4-second audios, I think, then produces sentences. But the concatenation GAN, the one that's only trained on words, pretty much produces only words, although it has become so good that it started basically rudimentary syntax. It started to place them one after another. So it would say water, underwater, or Andre, hi Andre, or things like that. So it's already, evolving in that direction where it's going from just words towards composing them. That's why we called it concatenation GAN.
And of course, when I say that the FinneGAN is much larger, that's just a relative term. Of course, compared to any large language model, it is a drop in the bucket. And so that is fundamentally something very different in what you're doing here from most of the artificial intelligence AI that most of us have had exposure to now on even a daily basis in internet searches and so on.
Yeah, I mean, we did train an LLM also in Finnegans Wake. We just didn't publish it here in this paper, but new papers are coming and it's already accessible online. We just wanted to see the difference and how good the model is with imaginating words. So with creating nonce words that could be words but are not, like tonard, least, castang, right? What Joyce does.
Yes.
And the model's really good at it, turns out.
Fantastic. And if you're ever open one day to training FinneGAN on our audio from our Finnegans Wake film series, we would be very open to that. So
wonderful.
But I am kind of wondering about that. Is the audio that you shared or brought or trained, what have you, for your FinneGAN, is that audio read by a human or is it read out loud by a machine?
It's read out loud by a machine. We didn't want to get into a copyright issue. We were considering, I know there's beautiful audio readings by, Irish actors. We were considering using that. I'm sure it would have a different tone to it if we had.
Okay, well, if you ever wanted to do that, I know a couple of Irish actors who have been reading Finnegans Wake a lot. So talk to me, and we're very happy to share. And I think it's just an extraordinary project that you've got going on here, that you have drawn this comparison between a kind of machine learning and it's a sort of infancy of machine learning and the importance of infancy and pre-verbal / post-verbal / dream verbal world of Finnegans Wake. It's really I think an inspired connection that you've made. And this term that you've created is one that I anticipate I'll be using in future, which is this imagitation, this imitation plus imagination that is so actively a part of the GANs and, of course, so actively a part of Finnegans Wake world. Nina, thank you very much for joining us here, telling us about what you're working on, telling us about your FinneGAN. And I look forward to future conversations in person and maybe in this format again in future.
Yes, that would be wonderful. Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
That was my interview with Berkeley scholar Nina Beguš. Together with her colleagues Gašper Beguš, Meta Haven, and Ricardo Petrini, Nina is the author of Latent Spacecraft, Brains, GANs, FinneGANs, to which you'll find a link in the transcript for this episode on One Little Goat Theatre Company's website, www.onelittlegoat.org. Join us in a fortnight for episode 25 when Richard Hart continues chapter 5 of Finnegans Wake. In the meantime, to be sure you don't miss the episode, why not follow or subscribe to this podcast? For more on One Little Goat's Finnegans Wake project, including transcripts of this podcast and the complete films of chapters 1, 2, and 3, visit our website at onelittlegoat.org. And to hear about upcoming performances and screenings, join our mailing list also on our website. One Little Goat Theatre Company is a non-profit, artist-driven, registered charity in the United States and Canada that depends on donations from individuals to make our productions, including this one, possible. If you're able, please make a tax-deductible donation through our website, www.onelittlegoat.org. Finnegans Wake is made possible by Friends of One Little Goat Theatre Company and the Immigrant Support Program of the Government of Ireland. Thank you for your support. Music for this episode was arranged and performed on the piano by yours truly, Adam Seelig, with Tyler Emond on bass and Jinu Isac on drums, recorded at Ghost Town Studio in Toronto. A big thank you once again to special guest Nina Beguš. Thank you as ever to the team at the Irish Consulate in Toronto, and thank you to production consultants Cathy Murphy and Andrew Moodie. Thank you for listening.